You are listening to the Mountainside Podcast, and our returning guest for this episode is from Colorado Parks and Wildlife Officer Scott Murdoch. Scott has joined us several times here on the podcast. I always enjoy having him in. We covered a lot of different subjects, including predator management, wildlife interactions, and much more. And I hope you enjoy the episode. Thanks for making it back in. I always enjoy having you guys in. And there's a lot going on in the state of Colorado right now with wildlife management. I guess for people that don't understand or that maybe don't hunt, mountain lions, just because you don't see them very often, the population is still pretty good here in the state, right?
Yeah, so our mountain lion population here in Colorado is doing quite well. We have no shortage of mountain lions, especially along the Front Range area. You know, when we have abundant deer populations, those lions do well. An average lion's going to kill about a deer a week, so you got to have a lot of food in order to feed a lot of lions, and we've got many thousands of lions here in Colorado. And as people kind of start recreating in and amongst the Front Range, sightings of those animals go up. But even with the sightings that we have, for as many folks that are out there, it's still quite rare to see a lion. There's plenty of lions around, far more than you would expect. But there's a lot of them around for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up, playing in the woods and in the backcountry and camping and stuff. And I think I've only seen two in the wild. One I saw last year, I'm pretty sure it was a cat. But it was typically when we're elk hunting, and you start cow calling or something like that. It's about your only chances, I think. I think the Native Americans used to call them ghosts, right?
Yeah, I mean,
they thought they were spirits.
They're pretty amazing. I mean, I've been around cats a lot just because of the nature of work that I'm in, and so we'll get calls quite often of, hey, I've got a deer that was killed in my backyard and this lion drug it up underneath my deck or underneath my trampoline, something like that. And of course, those are kind of public safety type issues that we have with a cat in direct proximity to a home, potentially where kids might be playing, something like that. And so those are situations that we kind of want to manage or deal with a little bit more so than we would, a deer getting killed, on an open space or on national forest. Obviously, we're just going to let the cat do its thing. But, a lot of times if I get a call here in Evergreen where a deer's drug up under somebody's deck, I'll go and remove that carcass and go dump that somewhere, and that cat will kind of move on. Just because of that safety thing. But you'll have these cats that are literally right in front of you. They're more or less defending their kills. I mean, they're not aggressive towards you, but they're around. They're like, hey, it took a lot of energy for me to kill this animal. I don't want you around. But really, those cats, they don't want anything to do with people. I mean, they're pretty standoffish. And even when I've had them right, like in a kind of a confined area, or I know there's a deer kill right here, you're like, man, I feel like there should be a cat around here, and you never see it, but it's like, that cat's right there. And then sometimes you'll be walking, you're like, oh shoot, there it is, and you're 10 feet from this cat.
Right.
And had you not, just known that carcass was there, you would have never even seen that cat. So there's probably more encounters with cats where you just never see them, and they don't do anything to the people, which is good.
Yeah, and I know we've talked about it before. It seems to be people that are smaller in stature, right? So kids, that sort of thing.
Yep.
Something that they don't feel as threatened by or could potentially be prey, right?
Yep. Yeah, and usually, the incidences we've had, and certainly the ones that I've dealt with, have been cats that are either young cats, so younger cats, or a cat that either is injured or sick, something like that. Usually that's the cause. It's not generally a healthy male or female cat. It's usually there's some reason it's going to be keying in on a human. Their natural prey is going to be deer, that size animal, 4 legs. They're not going to be keying in on somebody that's walking upright. They figured it out, and they've been hunted long enough that they associate people with the negative, negative things. So,
yeah, I think was it the last podcast you were telling me there was a cat down on the Platte River or something, like down in Denver, or was that you and me that were talking?
Well,
about
we had one
something?
in Lakewood last week.
Really?
So we have one in Lakewood, but we frequently get them along the Front Range.
Yeah.
I mean, we have an app that all of the officers and then our admin staff, at our customer service centers, that they track lion and bear sightings, interactions, conflicts, things like that. And so over the course of the year, we'll record all of the locations where we get bear and lion sightings or whatever. And frequently we'll have, bear and lion sightings in
inner city,
in town. And really most folks would never know about it. It's now with Ring cameras and things like that on your house. People are seeing these things,
I don't know how much footage I've seen from Ring cameras or trail cams of cats nowadays, especially since Instagram's gotten so popular and
Sure.
these social media platforms.
Yep. And especially along the Front Range, where our ability to manage cats is somewhat hindered, right? You can still hunt them. You can still utilize the normal hunting techniques for mountain lions. But the reality is that these properties are much smaller. And so, for the folks that don't know, the traditional way to hunt mountain lions is the use of hounds. And so someone will find tracks, a fresh track. They'll cut out the hounds, and hopefully you can keep up with the hounds, and the hounds can get to a location where, that they can tree that animal. But when you have small properties, like especially around Conifer and Evergreen, small properties, that the likelihood of that animal staying on the property you have permission to hunt is pretty slim.
To none, yeah.
And so hunting is largely, for mountain lions in this particular area is somewhat non-existent just because of that. Now on the national forest further west or south of here, mountain lion hunting is more common in there. And so a lot of the quotas along the Front Range actually don't ever really get closed because the ability for folks to actually hunt them, and actually be successful in hunting mountain lions is pretty slim. They're just not, there's just such elusive critters that without the use of hounds, our ability to manage wildlife in any sort of meaningful way is almost nil. I think most years around the direct Conifer and Evergreen area, we probably have more road kills and landowner kills than we actually have hunter harvests. So
for lions.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yep.
And I think we've seen it too, because at one point you could hunt bears with hounds as well,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
And now that is illegal, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And what is happening with the bear population because of that now? Have you guys seen a huge increase? I know we've talked about it on the podcast before, and I know that you can get issued a bear tag pretty easily in the state of Colorado now.
Yeah, so all of our bear hunting occurs basically in the fall, so September 2nd or after. About 50% of our bears actually will be in hibernation by about October 15th. So you have a pretty narrow window. September 2nd to about October 15th is when the bulk of the bears that we harvest are taken. So that's when most of the animals are hunted. Obviously you can keep your license or whatever. A lot of the licenses will go clear through usually the end of November, depending on the unit. But usually by Thanksgiving, those bears are in hibernation. So, it's a kind of a pig in a poke trying to find a bear at that time of the year. So when somebody's hunting bears, that key periods, that first part of September, when those bears are starting to go through what we call hyperphagia, they're basically just eating. And so they're a little bit easier to find if you can find the food source, if you can find good berry crops, if you can find good acorns, whatever those bears are hitting at that time of the year. It also means, things like trash cans and livestock at people's houses. Obviously, hunting those types of hunting over that is not an appropriate situation. But we've got lots of bears, and we've got lots of conflicts. I mean, that's one of the things that we deal with all summer long. I mean, it's a significant source of my time and energy all year long, and yeah, I mean, that's one of the potential costs of not hunting bears in the spring or being able to have additional management tools. But that's what we're dealt with. And so that's the way we manage them. And unfortunately, we have to deal with the conflicts that come up in the summer times.
Yeah. And can we just kind of, I guess, to take it back from a biology standpoint, why it's important to manage all species of wildlife?
Sure.
From mountain lions to bears to elk, deer, that sort of thing, and how humans play a huge part in that, and they have for a long time.
Sure. So North America is not the place that it was 200 years ago, right? We've got 330, 350 million people on, in just the United States, let alone Canada and Mexico. And so this continent has changed drastically over the last 200 years, and humans have played a massive role in that, right? We've had huge shifts in human populations, whether that's indigenous people to the current population. We've had huge shifts in the native populations with introduction of species, whatever types of animals and livestock to invasive species coming in over the last couple hundred years. We've seen, absolute decimation of wildlife across North America between the bison and antelope herds. And
well, the elk were almost at one point, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. Passenger pigeons are extinct. Carolina parakeets extinct. There's a whole bunch of animals in North America that are no longer existing. And so that was kind of the foundation for wildlife management. So a lot of forward-thinking folks back in the day basically said, like, hey, if everybody just takes however many animals they want, we're not going to have any wildlife left. And so that was when the first game laws were created. And no animal has gone extinct once there's been regulated hunting. So the managed take of wildlife, not only funds wildlife management, but it also helps, kind of keep that take in check. Also, while allowing the public to utilize that resource, because the resource that we have is a good one, right?
It's such a huge resource for me and my family, for
Sure.
me especially. I mean,
Yep.
I hate buying meat from the grocery store. Jeremy and I were just talking about this yesterday about, like, man, if I have to go to the grocery store to buy meat, I'm just pissed off,
Right. Yep.
Yeah. So it's important to me to fill my freezer every hunting season, and I prefer it over or buy from a private rancher or a local rancher or something like that.
Yep. So we got this great resource, right? So we have this resource, and then there's a lot of demands that this resource puts on the environment, right? It can, if we have too many elk, it's going to hammer the habitat. If we don't have enough don't have enough elk, right, our habitat may be overgrown, and it may kind of change what works for certain species, right? So all of these things are interconnected. The predators, the prey, and the habitat. All of these things are connected. And because we've made such kind of a mess of everything, right, we kind of have a responsibility to start managing these species. And so we manage the predators, we manage the prey, and we manage the habitat. Those are some of the key components of wildlife management here in North America. And things that we can do to increase wildlife, right? If we do habitat projects, things to help benefit certain species depending on what we're trying to manage for. That in turn increases prey availability, which is a good thing, right? Those prey eat that food, help distribute nutrients among the landscape, distribute seeds, whatever. But there's a lot of benefits to having large ungulates and things like that on the landscape doing that stuff. And then we also have the role predators play. Predators move animals around, right? Just so an animal doesn't camp in one single spot. Predators, and that could be people too, help move and keep those animals moving around on the landscape so that there's kind of a more equal distribution, so that one part of the habitat isn't hammered versus another. And it also can help keep those predator or those prey animals in check. Now, what's different about 200 years ago is that the public really expects that populations are going to be somewhat level, right? They're obviously going to fluctuate to some extent, but 200 years ago, when there was no direct management from humans, essentially it was, if there was too many prey and it overutilized the resource, those prey animals starved. If there was too many prey animals, the predator population went up until it ate all the prey animals. And then what happened to the predators? Well, those animals collapsed, right?
Right.
So there's these drastic up and down cycles, and it's kind of the classic predator-prey relationship. Anybody who has studied any of that has seen those. And so what we as wildlife managers try to do is try to keep those a little bit, those ungulations of the predator-prey cycles a little bit flatter, right? The public doesn't want to see habitat being overutilized. They don't want to see starving prey species. They don't want to see starving predators because there's no prey, right? All of this we want to kind of work in sort of a harmonious is not really the right word, but kind of a little bit more balanced way than maybe what historically was out there, because we've manipulated our habitats and our environment so much that going back, to what it was 200 years is not a realistic thing, especially when you have 350 million people here in the United States. So we manage them, we live with them, and ultimately we control predators, we control prey, and we try to improve habitat wherever we can. So that's kind of the basics of wildlife management here in Colorado.
So from the predator aspect, are cats overpopulated currently in the state of Colorado, or is that an issue because of, like, especially you said on the Front Range a few minutes ago, I'm sure that it's broken up, the state's broken up into hundreds of game units.
Sure.
I don't know how many exactly, but yeah, it's broken up into hundreds of game units, and I'm sure along the Front Range, and for people that aren't familiar with Colorado, that's basically where the plains meet the mountains, and the majority of the population of Colorado is living right in the foothills, right there, right where the mountains start. So Evergreen is kind of considered the Front Range.
Sure.
Boulder, Colorado Springs, all the major cities in the state of Colorado,
sure,
are right up against that, and probably the densest population in the state.
Yeah. So a number of the things that we kind of put into consideration when we're creating what we call as our herd management plans. Each herd management plan covers a certain geographic area, and it's going to have kind of what we term as an objective. That objective is essentially, say for elk, we're shooting for X number of elk for this given area. And then we'll do our winter counts or flights, and we'll plug those numbers in, and we're like, oh, well, we're above that objective. If we're below that objective, we're probably going to cut back on licenses, try and build that population up a little bit. If we're above objective, we're going to try and drop that down. Now, elk are easy to count, right? Other things like mountain lions, are not so easy to count. And so some of the other criteria we look at prey abundance, we look at habitat types, we look at percentage of females that are taken in the harvest. So if you have too many females in a population, that might indicate that a population's on the decline. Not, if it's a real low take, that might indicate that there's more availability of males. Maybe that population's on the incline. And then a lot of anecdotal reports. Some areas of the state we will collar cats and look at movements or do Oh, there's these camera traps. Essentially, we'll put trail cameras up, and we've done that looking at individuals or putting, these barbed wire areas around the cameras with a kind of electronic squeaker in there, and these animals will come through those barbed wire areas, and we'll snag a little bit of hair, and we'll do DNA, and we can test the numbers of individuals. And when we have a large grid of these cameras, we can get kind of a rough idea of the total number of animals in a given area. So you can get basically a density for this type of habitat. So there's a lot of ways to try and figure out, do we have a lot of cats? Do we not have enough? Are they increasing? Are they decreasing? That type of thing. I would say overall, mountain lion populations are doing quite well here in Colorado. And really all across North America, mountain lions are doing quite well. If you look at big cats in the world, most places, big cats are on the decline.
Right.
Okay?
Tigers, lions,
yeah,
cheetahs, jaguars, all that.
Mountain lions are not. I mean, if you look at the Midwest states,
really?
Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, all of those, they're seeing increases in mountain lion sightings. So these mountain lions that are living here,
California's gotten really bad.
California's got lots. I mean, what's neat about mountain lions is they're one of the widest ranging large cats in the world, and they're just very adaptable. I mean, when you got a mountain lion that'll wander through, CU campus and not think anything about it, that's an adaptable animal. And so because of that, a lot of the same things that might affect other species don't affect them. Some animals are more sensitive to those things. Mountain lions are they're kind of a generalist. I mean, they can get along with a lot of different habitat types. I've seen them above tree line. I've seen them down in lower river bottoms and dry country. They can, as long as there's food, they're doing just fine. So yeah, we're doing quite well with cats.
Have you seen a decrease in the interest of hunting them just because of we obviously have in bears because of some of the laws that have been put in place. It's not as easy to hunt a bear as it once was, right? And I think just in general, as generations progress in our state and in the Rocky Mountain region and in the U.S. and then even outside of the U.S., like, hunting just seems to decrease every year, right? Like, you're not seeing these huge influx in hunters or licenses. And for me personally, I don't really have any desire to go hunt a predator. I'm fortunate enough to hunt on some private land. Mm-hmm. And the very nice lady that lets me hunt on her private land is begging me to shoot a bear that's on her private land because it's a nuisance, right? Like, it's always on their deck, or it's always, she's worried about her dogs, and it's not a small bear.
Sure.
So I've considered it from that standpoint, but like, I just don't have the desire to go and to hunt. I think in general, a majority of hunters are typically they hunt elk and deer like once a year, right? They can only get out. These guys have full-time jobs. A lot of them are blue collar. They can't take the time off of work to go on crazy hunts or anything like that. What are you guys seeing from that standpoint of interest and actually tags purchased?
I can't say to the total number of tags. Mm-hmm. I'd have to do some digging on, year to year.
Sure.
If mountain lion hunting has become more popular.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot either.
Sure, no worries. As far as bear hunting, I think there's a component of the public that has a interest in bear hunting and specifically targeting a bear. I would say most of the bear hunters that I run into are deer and elk hunters that just pick up a bear tag just in case they see one. And bear hunting in general is pretty unsuccessful adventure. Especially around conifer and evergreen, the habitat's not all that great. If you go to some of the other parts of the state where bear densities are higher just because the habitat's so much better, where they have a lot of acorns and other food or mass crops. Some of the stuff on the west slope near Glenwood or even Uncompadre Plateau or down near Trinidad area. I mean, you can legitimately go out and target bears and do quite well. Around Conifer and Evergreen, I mean, it's pretty slim where we have folks that are actually successful, just because the bears that are available are usually the ones that are hanging out in town, and on the national forest, habitat's just not all that great. When it comes to mountain lion hunting, we have a few or handful of folks that will pick up a lion tag and just hope that they happen to see one. I would say that's kind of the minority for sure. They just, if they're hunting coyotes or something like that and they happen to see a lion, they'll take one. But then there's the guys that do it seriously, and those are the guys that have dogs or whatever, and they'll get their buddy or whatever will come with them and go hunt. I have seen probably an uptick in the number of folks that are actively hunting lions in that regard, and I think with some of these talks of ballot measures and things like that has people a little nervous of like, well, I better do it now before that opportunity is taken away. I know there's a lot of fear with some of the hunters and houndsmen going on now, and understandably so. I mean, it's a changing.
I'm not familiar. Is there something on the ballot now that?
Not right now. Last year there was
up?
one. There was some discussion on some of that stuff. And,
okay.
I don't know if I've seen lots of billboards. I don't know if you've seen some of those.
No, I haven't.
Months ago, there's some stuff, but predator hunting is generally seen as not super favorable.
Well, we just had a really good example of that with Derek and his cat.
Sure.
I mean, the heat that he's taken publicly, I mean, he's a friend of mine, so I've talked to him personally, it's pretty crazy. I mean, and to make national news, like Fox News and all these different spots, and I actually kind of commend him for standing up for being on the side of conservation and doing it legally and all that sort of stuff, I think is commendable. But at the same time, this is exactly why I don't post photos of the animals I harvest. One, it's a personal preference and it's important to me, and I'm not knocking anybody that does.
Sure.
But the amount of, hate or kickback or criticism that's going to come your way is tremendous.
Yeah.
It's not old school where you like waving the Polaroid picture and, to show your buddies.
Sure. I mean, if you want accolades, right, send them to your close friends that are hunters.
Sure.
If other folks are seeing that, there's probably a good chance that you're going to get negative attention. And just understand that,
I get negative attention just for talking about it on here.
Sure. I think one thing too that a lot of folks don't know is they think there's a perception with bears and lions that it's only about trophy hunting. It's only about this. I can tell you, I've had bear meat, I've had lion meat. If I could hunt a mountain lion for the meat every year, I would, because they're that
really
they're excellent eating, phenomenal eating. I'd put them up against any animal out in the woods. I mean, they're that good. Frankly, when I have a roadkill, I've got a long list of people that would be knocking down my door trying to get me to donate that animal to them because they want to utilize the mountain lion for their meat. Bears less so. I've had bear that was okay. It wasn't my favorite per se. I'd much rather have a deer or an elk or something like that. But yeah.
Maybe it was me then, because the first time I tasted mountain lion, maybe it wasn't prepared right or something, which is key, right? When it comes to preparing wild game. Like if you overcook an elk steak, good luck, man. Sure. You might as well have beef jerky for dinner,
Yeah, a lot of times people, if they keep the hides on or they don't gut them quickly and get those animals cooled down, and then just, if you take it to a processor, that can affect things. There's a lot that goes into the proper preparation of meat. I mean, we could have a full podcast on just meat prep, and maybe we can someday.
Yeah, that'd be great.
But, people think that you can just kill an animal for its trophy parts. And that's not the case here in Colorado. You can pursue any size animal that you see fit on your license. If you want to hunt a large elk Or if you want to shoot a smaller elk, as long as it's legal within your license, you can do so. What's not legal is to abandon the carcass of that animal, and so going and killing an animal, whether it be a big mountain lion or an elk or whatever, you're not allowed to just go and dump that meat. I mean, that
right. So even if you take it and get it processed or quarter it or whatever you do, and get it home, you can't, if you're caught throwing it out.
Yep.
That's against the law, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, I mean, that's one of the main provisions of what we allow. That's one of the main tenets of hunting, right? Mm-hmm. We're going to hunt these animals and we're going to utilize that animal. And if you want to turn
Which totally makes sense. I mean, from an ethical standard, I think that
absolutely,
it's super important.
And so when it comes to trophy hunting, people think, well, I can just go and shoot the biggest animal and that's what I get, and the meat's an afterthought. Well, that's not the case. I mean, sure, somebody can pursue the largest animal that they want to or whatever. Maybe that's the phase that they're in their hunting adventure and their journey, that they want to pursue the largest animal, but they're still required to do that. They're obligated by law that they have to take care of that and utilize that.
Yeah.
So.
How often, with the increase in the popularity of bow hunting, and this is one of my questions coming up here too, so don't let me forget the over-the-counter license deal, but we dive into that in a minute. But with that popularity increase, and we're seeing all these guys on social media that some of them are really good, some of them I don't agree with, some of them are just guys that are getting into hunting and they have a platform, right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I've seen more bow hunters in the last 5 to 6 years than I've ever seen it in my life.
Sure.
Out in the woods. How many of these guys, and we've talked about this before, I run across them all the time. I've talked about it with my buddy Jeremiah, who's an outfitter, and I think I talked about it with you as well. Just uneducated people that are just out trying it. And I commend them for it, right? Because like some of these guys will be 7-8 miles back in, out of a backpack or something like that. Are you seeing people that aren't familiar with taking that full carcass, or are you guys seeing an influx of people wasting meat? Because there's, for example, last season, normally I go with uncles, my brother. Everybody had to go at a different time last year, so I went solo for the first time ever. So generally we would go 7-8 miles deep because I have help to get a bull out if I shoot one, right? And there's a certain amount of time in September where if there's not snow on the ground, which is very seldom now, the meat can spoil within a matter of, 48 hours if you don't get that whole animal out. And that would be considered wasting it, in my opinion. So when I see these guys that are back there by themselves and we're back there as a group, that's concerning to me, that they might take an animal because of the nature of it, and maybe it's their first elk. They don't understand the full process. I mean, you have multiple hours of just field dressing at that point. Or if you're going to bone it out, it's even longer, right? It's less weight to carry, but it's definitely takes longer. Are you guys seeing an increase or an uptick in wasted meat and stuff like that?
Last year in particular, we dealt with a number of cases like that, which was somewhat concerning. And even more than that, there was a number of situations where they were just, shot and outright left.
Really?
So
folks, like not finding an animal or not looking?
More so like they shot two and it was like, oh, I'm just going to leave this kind of thing. But other situations, there was, all kinds of different things. My personal bow hunt this year, I ran into that a lot, and it was probably the most I've ever seen it. And no knock on non-residents, but it was mostly non-resident guys in 2s and 3s, and they were a long ways back. And I utilize horses, and I usually hunt with one other guy. But we can get an elk out pretty quickly with horses for the most part. But there were places that I was seeing, guys with 2 or 3 backpackers that I wasn't willing to go, which was kind of amazing. And several of the guys I asked, had you ever packed out an elk? Have you ever gutted an elk? Have you ever quartered an elk? Have you ever felt the quarter? All of the answers were no.
Really?
Which I think is awesome that they're not hunting from the road, right? For years it was always like, man, why don't these guys just get off the road,
Right.
And now these folks are getting off the road, which is great. But I think we have to, not everybody. A lot of times when folks are posting on social media, it's like, hey, I look at this solo backpack hunt, whatever. What you don't know is the truth all the time. Is this a legitimate, was it a backpack hunt? Did he have 5 other guys that he called and said, hey, I got an elk down? Because packing a bull out by yourself is one thing. Packing a bull out with 5 guys is a whole different deal. And so.
And that's kind of what I was getting at for my solo hunt last year.
Yep.
I stayed within a 3-mile radius of my truck, and I can track it from a GPS, which is awesome. And I know the area because I've hunted in there a bunch.
Sure.
So I stayed within that 3-mile radius because I felt comfortable and confident within 24 hours.
Yep.
I could get, even if it was a 300 class bull, which probably wasn't going to happen, but if I shot something within that 3-mile radius, I feel like I could have got it out on myself. But also as a backup plan, just in case, because sometimes you might not have the best shot. I mean, your intentions are always to have a quick, clean kill, but sometimes you might have to track something for a mile or 2.
Sure.
So I called a local outfitter and said, hey, if I get something down, could I call you? Could you bring horses or whatever? So having a backup plan too.
And I think that's the best way to go about it. Is doing exactly what you did, because I mean that's a critical part. I mean, as difficult as elk hunting is, the hunt is the easy part. Once you kill something, that's when it really gets difficult. And one of the things I do at our hunter education classes that we teach is I'll get a pack frame and I'll put 60 pounds on the pack frame, which is a small quarter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most quarters are going to be heavier than that on especially a mature bull. I'll volunteer. Hey, who wants to carry this elk quarter? That's 1 quarter, right? And I've got 3 more quarters, plus all the neck meat, plus the back strap, plus the head, plus your gear. So you may have 6 to 8 pack loads of meat that you've got to pack out and then go back in.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start explaining that to folks and they physically feel that weight, it's a bit different of a task for them, and they kind of rein it in a little bit. It's just a kind of a...
I mean, that's also why in July I have a 6-gallon water jug that fits into my frame pack. So I can fill it up from my house and hike uphill. And then, for 4 or 5 miles, and then I'm able to dump it and come back, so, or 2.5 miles, dump it and then come back. So you're not carrying all that weight downhill. But I do that for specific reasons, just to have my legs. I mean, because if you're not doing it on a regular basis, to put that much weight on your back is... Yeah, you might be able to do it for 1 load. But, do it 4, 5, 6 times in a row on every one of those trips in and out. Not to mention, it's a task. You're at altitude. You can train all you want, in Denver, but when you get it at 11.5 or something, there's all kinds of different stuff that starts happening to your body, as far as cramping and oxygen and just all that sort of stuff. So,
and you're not lower than that.
And you're not even hunting on a trail. I mean, you're hiking over deadfall and over rocks and logs, and the grass is slick, and I mean all kinds of other things.
I helped a guy pack out a bull this year, and it was raining.
Mm-hmm.
And where I was hunting up in the flat tops, it was just a muddy mess. Like, we must have fell 5 or 6 times. And I don't think I'll ever go back out without trekking poles. I never wanted to be that dumb old guy with the trekking poles, but after last year, I was like, I think there's room in the pack for them, because that would have helped.
When I hunted sheep, that was something I bought specifically for my sheep hunt, just because of the country I was in, and I had kind of done that same thing of, I'm not going to be that guy with trekking poles up in the hills. And I tell you what, I mean, they're with me all the time.
Where are you at with sheep?
Oh God, you might as well be at 14,000 feet
Yeah,
for
I
some
killed-
of it.
I
I killed mine just over 13.6, something like that.
Yeah, and you're talking about like that's a whole nother level of hunting too.
Yeah.
One, because it's not easy to draw a tag.
Yeah.
So some guys have spent a lifetime, waiting to draw a tag,
Mm-hmm.
and then the environment that you're hunting in, and a lot of times these animals are on cliffs or you're shooting off of a cliff. I mean, a lot of hunters die.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hunting.
There were a number of times where I was very thankful for my trekking poles, and I've even packing other critters out. Elk, I remember breaking one, as you're slipping and falling and
Really?
fall on one, and
Yeah.
but it's like, man, that would have been a lot worse had I not had these poles to begin with. But
Yeah, I mean, like, look at that photo behind you. I mean, I think that's,
oh yeah,
that's the type of rock and stuff that you're dealing with is just,
Yep.
It's brutal. That's why I don't sheep or goat hunt either. I just love hunting elk. Which brings me to my next question. Because of this influx, and is this one of the reasons why is this one of the reasons why Parks and Wildlife, or is it a ballot initiative? I don't know anything about this. I've just seen the uproar
sure.
in the bow hunting community about potentially going to a draw only for archery season. Is that?
Sure. So at one of the commission meetings in January, there was some conversation about over-the-counter archery, and this is, I think, specifically talked about when it comes to the Grand Mesa. And so I believe they ended up changing some of the management on the Grand Mesa when it comes to the over-the-counter archery. But I think there's a bigger discussion that was initially brought up in the big game season structure about statewide limiting of archery, over-the-counter archery. And I think that is something that the public needs to know and understand and be involved with. There's a number of things that the public can do if they have concerns, and different ways that they can be involved. February 15th, there's going to be a sportsman's caucus. The Northeast region is going to have a sportsman's caucus where commissioners are present, and sportsmen can go and have these types of conversations. I think that info you can find on our website. But then also, it's critical that hunters are engaged with Parks and Wildlife and, observing or being physically present for any sort of commission meetings. We've got a lot of big topics right now. We've got wolf management. We've got big game season structure, which encompasses a variety of topics, including potentially archery, but also, how are your seasons outlined? A number of years ago, right, we changed the way that the season dates fell, and so some of that can be played with. Resident versus non-resident allocation. So what percentage of the tags are going to residents versus non-residents? All of that stuff is critical for us to manage wildlife, but we really rely on the hunters' input in order to do that. There was a survey that was done when this big game season structure kind of kicked off. We got a dismal 2,000 responses from our hunting community. How many hundreds of thousands of people come to Colorado every year to hunt, and we had 2,000 responses. So I challenge the hunting community, myself included, to be more involved in those types of outreach things. Go to the Sportsman Caucus in your region. Be involved in the DAU plan for the type or the species that you're most interested in hunting. Those are the hunt management plans for the species that you're involved with. And then pay attention to the commission meetings. Go to the commission meetings. If there's things that are on your mind, make it known to those things. Other things that you can be part of are kind of some of these non-governmental organizations, things like Colorado Bow Hunters, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. All of these are good groups that represent hunters and anglers in positive ways, and they have a voice that is bigger than just a single you or I going in and talking to somebody.
Yeah, no, it's pretty frightening how many hunters, I mean, they enjoy it, but they don't advocate for it when you start looking at the sheer numbers. I think one of the biggest ways that you can contribute in that you guys get a lot of information from, or Colorado Parks and Wildlife does, and I think other state agencies, whether it's Wyoming or Montana, are those surveys, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the questions that they do ask you, and consciously think out your answers, like it's not a race to get to the end, right?
Yep.
They ask you, did you harvest? How would you rate your hunt? I think like on a scale, right? And then they also ask you, how many hunters did you see? Did you feel like there was too many hunters? Did you feel like there was not enough animals? I mean, there's a full list of questions that you guys get some valuable information on, and it also helps you understand success rates, right? So you can actually understand management.
Sure. Some of the tools that we use, one is those surveys. I guess as an example, in a lot of our areas, we don't necessarily manage for the maximum number of animals in a particular area, right? The habitat in general could support more animals than what we have on the ground. There's social factors, there's political factors, there's all kinds of things that end up making us manage in a little bit different ways, right? If we had as many animals on a landscape, say elk, on a landscape as we could possibly have, we've got some potential conflicts, right? We might have potential ag-related issues with ag producers getting into haystacks or competing with cattle on the forage on wherever. So you may have a social issue there, right? We may have increased road strikes on highways in particular areas, and so we may reduce the total number of animals in a given area because of that. We may have, there's any number of reasons why we want more or less animals in a given area, but there's these social factors always kind of play into it. Mm-hmm. If the population in Evergreen didn't tolerate the elk that they do tolerate, 10 years ago when we did that survey, people said, no, we have too many elk. Okay, the population, the habitat could support it, but the public was saying, no, we have too many elk. So we've reduced that population, and now folks are saying, well, where'd the elk go? And so folks are sometimes saying, no, we've gone too far, let's back up, let's maybe increase those elk. But all of these types of things have, all of them impact the way that we manage our animals.
It's not just hunting. It's not just for the pleasure of hunting. There's so many more things that go involved, like you said, from whether somebody thinks something's cute and cuddly, or if somebody views it as food, or impact to their business, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, there's a lot of different variables for you guys to keep track of.
And each area is going to be managed for different things. We have opportunity, areas where we can have a lot of hunters, and part of the drawback of having a lot of hunters is that you're probably going to have a little bit less positive experience in terms of the numbers of animals you see, being able to get away from people, that type of thing. Mm-hmm. But the positive of that is that I have the opportunity to hunt in that particular area every year. Some of these areas, you don't have that opportunity. A buddy of mine, he drew a pretty coveted tag this last year up in 201, and he had a great hunt up there. And elk all over the place, was able to find a lot of elk, large elk. Fantastic hunt, right? Who wouldn't want to go there? Mm-hmm. But it also took him 27 years to draw that tag. So that's not something that you get to go and experience every year. That's something that might be once in a lifetime for that person to experience. And so the criteria for that particular game management is going to be managed significantly different than a place like an over-the-counter unit. And folks have to understand that there's a drawback, right? Mm-hmm. If you want to be able to hunt every year, you're going to have to deal with some crowding. Now, are there ways or tools that we can use to help mitigate some of that? We've utilized over-the-counter with caps in some instances with bear tags and had some success with that. the resident, non-resident quota. We've seen kind of resident numbers kind of stagnant as far as the total number of hunters. Those have been pretty consistent over the years, but we've seen an increase in the number of non-resident hunters. I mean, everybody wants to come to the West to hunt.
Yeah, we're one of the only states, I think, where you can come and get an over-the-counter elk tag and go out and hunt elk.
Yep. So that's something that I know folks are looking at is are the impacts of non-residents too significant? I don't know. I don't know what they'll decide. Ultimately, hopefully that hunters can voice their opinions and get their opinions out there, and hopefully the commission will take those things into consideration.
Now, are some of those other groups showing up, whether it's, let's say PETA, for example? I mean, do they show up to some of these meetings, and like anti-hunting organizations? Are ranchers? I'm sure that there's an agricultural-based representation at some of these meetings as well. Are some of those people showing up?
Most definitely. I mean, maybe not necessarily directly tied to the over-the-counter issue,
Sure.
but wolves have been a hot topic with user groups of all types. And our commission is a diverse commission as well. I mean, we've got 3 sportsmen, we've got 3 ag, we've got 3 recreationists, and then we've got 2 that are just kind of, they don't have necessarily a tied affiliation, but all of these 11 members of the commission come from all kinds of backgrounds. They are not all hunters. They are not, necessarily keyed in on one aspect. I mean, they have to represent the community as a whole, and so they're going to have, a diverse opinion. Mm-hmm. But they need to be, I guess they need to be informed from.
I think that's the biggest thing too, is to be educated before you go in to make a decision. And this isn't about ideology, right? It's about biology, in my opinion. So I think really understanding the facts behind something, or, talking to somebody like a game warden, like, just talk to you guys, when you do see somebody, and asking questions, because you are biologists. You're not just a game warden. You're not just a wildlife officer. You're not just,
and that's why I
employee.
think the opinion of hunters is so valuable. Mm-hmm. So many of the hunters that I talk to have a immense knowledge base because they spend so much time in the woods. They don't necessarily have the hard data, but they have a lot of anecdotal data. They know where these animals are going. They know what habitats they're using. They know if the population's up or down. I mean, they can't tell you what the population numbers might be, but they're pretty darn confident, hey, the population's going up, population's going down. We're not seeing as many bulls. We're not seeing as many bucks. They're a phenomenal resource, and that's why I encourage hunters to be more engaged with.
Because they're the closest to the actual thing.
Sure. And a lot of our commission are not hunters, and so they need to hear from hunters about that perspective.
It makes a lot of sense. I've never really thought about it that way, and I guess I should probably get more involved than I am. Because it's important
in all our
to
free
me.
time, right?
Yeah.
So,
Exactly.
It's hard, but
it is.
It's
and that's why I spend time on it here at the podcast too. I think it's important. That's why I enjoy having you, or Colorado Parks and Wildlife, or anybody from any affiliated game warden positions. We've talked to some people out of California. We've talked to some different organizations, like Howl for Wildlife is great, because on a national standard, they're bringing light to some of these ballot initiatives and stuff like that, and educating the general public, mainly the hunters. Because I think if you live in Arkansas, how are you going to know about this unless you're following Colorado news, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yep.
There's a huge disconnect there, I think, in that aspect, and they're kind of filling that, which is great. So there's plenty of places out there to get education now, and I think that we've, as a hunting community, or speaking for the hunting community, they've really woken up to it and listening to podcasts and stuff like that. So that's one reason why we cover it, and appreciate you coming in to help shed some light on that. With what is the best way to get some information if somebody wanted to know more about elk populations, or if they wanted to know more about mountain lion populations in the state of Colorado specifically, so they can make some logical decisions to what, if it does go to a ballot box situation or they're going to one of these commission meetings, they can speak educated on it. Because I think that that's the biggest fear, right? Like, nobody wants to sound like a dumbass or not have facts backed up to what they're talking about, right?
Sure.
Or majority of people.
Yep.
There are some of those guys out there.
Sure.
But what, in your opinion, what's the best way to go about trying to get some of that information? Because it's not easy to come by.
Yeah. So one of the things that I suggest folks go to our website first, right? A lot of the answers you can find on there, especially if they're kind of just run-of-the-mill questions. Our website's going to have a lot of those options. The other thing is, if you got specific type questions, maybe it's a specific herd question for a given area, get in touch with the biologist, get in touch with your local wildlife officer. I field questions all the time, and I've had questions, all kinds of questions, and I try to be as honest and upfront with folks about that, whatever the question it is that they have.
And you guys do some stuff for the general public, like sitting here at the podcast.
Sure.
I know that you've gone to like some realtor meetings and stuff just to educate people that are moving into the area.
Yep.
Living with wildlife. So,
Sportsman show. I was just at the Sportsman show, and we talked to quite a few folks there. They had a bunch of questions about various things, but so
yeah, I didn't even think about that. Yeah, that's a good way. So start at the website, and then if you need questions beyond that, it's okay to contact Parks and Wildlife to ask somebody over the phone. I mean, anytime that I've called for a question regarding a draw, a game unit, something like that, I've been able to talk to somebody, which I think is amazing, right? Because especially nowadays, it's like if you call an airline, good luck. You're talking to somebody in India at the end of, 5 computers or something,
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, our admin staff, if you call our Denver office, I mean, they can answer the vast majority of questions. I mean, they field thousands of calls, probably hundreds of calls per day in some instances, especially as it gets towards like application season, they get hammered. They really take a huge amount of workload off of the field folks. But there's always questions that they can't answer. And so we end up handling some of those that are more location specific, or maybe a herd specific, or, I heard this or I heard that kind of thing. I don't mind having those conversations of what's going on. We've had to dispel myths about, well, so-and-so's, I heard a lion was, going to attack a kid here or whatever, and we've had to dispel some of that of, oh yeah, that's not the case, or that is the case, or whatever. And I don't mind having those conversations with folks.
It's good to know. So some of these commission meetings that are happening right now are on the wolf reintroduction, right? Yep. And I think by December of 2023, there needs to be wolves on the ground, right, that have been repopulated. So it's like kind of coming down to the wire of coming up with an action plan. Can you shed some light on some of the latest news? Because I haven't been to any of these.
Sure.
I'm sure a lot of our listeners are interested in it.
Yeah, so there's been a number, I guess a series of public meetings trying to get the public's input on the draft wolf management plan. So the wolf management plan came out just recently, and they've been subsequently having meetings. If you haven't seen or looked at our draft wolf management plan, it's on our website. You can download, I think it's a PDF. And through, I think, February 22nd is our period of comment. So
Jeremy, we've mentioned I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No worries.
We've mentioned the website a couple times. Can you just pull it up? Because I always forget this address. So if you want more information on all kinds of different stuff, anything that's regarding Colorado and wildlife and parks in general, maybe you just want to go recreate someplace, there's a ton of information on here, and that is cpwshop.com. Is that?
It should be.
Actually, go back, click the very top, click the logo, and it should take you back to the main page, because I think, or go to home right there at the top of the sliding bar. I think it's because maybe
Maybe logged in or
yeah.
Are you logged in?
something.
No.
CPW.
Yeah, it's cpwshop.com.
Okay. Colorado.gov. I'm sure that there's a link that you could get to it from there.
Yeah, it used to be.
Oh, sorry. Go back one more,
state.
Jeremy. Yeah, I'm sorry. Stay right there for a minute. It's cpw.state.co.us. Now I remember. Yeah. Okay. That's the actual site.
Yeah, this is the one where you can purchase a
Right.
hunting or fishing license or OHV snowmobile permit.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, sorry. So back to that. So if somebody wanted to go get the wolf management plan.
Yeah, they can review that. That's got all basically, that's their draft plan of this is how we're going to do whatever we set out to do. They have it, you have that opportunity to comment through almost the end of February 22nd, if I'm correct. And then at that point, they're going to take all those comments, kind of, change whatever they need to change, however they decide to do that. And then at that point, the ball's rolling and things are happening. Some exciting news. They did capture 2 wolves just last week. It's a couple days ago, I think. Might have been last week. But anyways, they got collars on 2 of the wolves. I think they were both adult males.
And they were from the Jackson pack or something like that. So they had migrated into Colorado, right? Those were
Correct.
not reintroduced.
Nope, those were not reintroduced. And at one point, one of the males, and then there's a female, they had several, young ones. So at one point there were 6, and I don't know exactly the full history of where those all kind of have gone. But anyways, they got collars on these 2, and so hopefully we'll learn a little bit more information. So that was in
North Park?
North Park, correct? Yep. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the newest thing is that the 2 wolves will have collars on, and then we'll be able to kind of see where they're moving, what habitats they're utilizing, and that'll be a better way for us to find out if there's any sort of denning locations, stuff like that.
Do you know, just from being involved in any of this, do they expect to reintroduce wolves on the Front Range at all, or has there been talks about that? Because there's, like we were talking earlier, the population is so dense right here.
Sure.
And you guys already deal with wildlife conflicts on a pretty regular basis, along the Front Range, especially on the predatory side. Is that...
Yeah, so undoubtedly there will be wolves on the Front Range. That's not where they're going to be reintroduced. So they've identified some reintroduction locations, all of which will be on the West Slope, which was part of the original ballot measure. Okay. So that was in that language. Basically, it was going to be introduced on the Western Slope, and now they basically come up with some criteria. It's essentially 60 miles from any border, so Utah or Wyoming, New Mexico border, so more central to the state. A lot of it basically from, there's a map that we can pull up on our website, but it's essentially kind of that I-70 corridor, more or less Silverthorne over to Glenwood Springs, maybe a little bit further Glenwood Springs, but that's kind of the core area where they're kind of looking. And then the Gunnison Basin further south, and then a little bit further north, so not quite to Steamboat, but south of Steamboat. So
it's only a matter of time before we have a wolf on the Front Range. Potentially, I mean, Silverthorne is a direct shot over the Continental Divide from us.
Yep. In other states where they put wolves, they'll put wolves in a given area, and there'll be some immediate dispersal, and that dispersal can be, anywhere from 20 to 130 miles. They're going to disperse to some level until they figure out, hey, this is where I want to set up camp. So they're going to be moving, right? So just because you put them in a certain area doesn't mean they're staying there. So, in reality, they're going to be put in certain spots, but the reality is they could be found anywhere in Colorado. And those animals will have collars on them as well, so we can kind of get an idea of what habitats they're using and kind of go from there. So,
Can we talk about the coyote population here a little bit and how many interactions you have? That's probably, from a predatory animal, that's probably the most interactions that I've ever had, whether it's from pets or, in my yard, or Jeremy just had one last week. Your son was taking the trash out or something, right? And there's three coyotes? 3 of them, yeah. Okay.
In the driveway.
Okay.
Is that here local?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just over the hill
Yeah, just
here.
up over the hill here.
Sure.
Yeah. And in my neighborhood, where I live, back behind the golf course there's a culvert back there that I think that there's a small pack living in the culvert,
Yep.
Which is fine. I've never had an issue.
Sure.
I know some of the neighbors have had some issues with the loss of animals, cats specifically and stuff like that. Do gray wolves and coyotes I know I've seen some coyotes with mange on them as well. I mean, do they kind of, because they're from the dog family, could these wolves run into some of the same issues that coyotes have? Could we run into some of the same issues as a population dealing with gray wolves, or has there been any studies on
There
that
certainly
sort of stuff?
Yeah, there certainly could be. Wolves, if you look at what the populations, when wolves are brought into areas, they hit the coyote populations pretty hard. I mean, they'll kill coyotes a lot. So there will probably be some of that. Obviously,
Which necessarily wouldn't be a bad thing, because in my opinion, coyotes are
Right.
overpopulated.
Yeah, I mean, they'll figure out what equilibrium makes sense for the landscape. And I mean, there's going to be a number of ecological changes that we'll see with wolves on the ground, both with our prey populations, potential. I mean, all kinds of things.
Probably the size of coyotes, because I've noticed from when I was a kid, I don't remember seeing coyotes as big. Like, I've seen some and I'm like, is that a wolf? Like,
right.
Before, they're a lot bigger than I ever remember.
Yeah, I mean, there's a pretty interesting book, Coyote America. I don't know if you ever read it.
It's on my list, but I haven't. Is that a Steve Rinella book, or is it?
I don't know I can't remember. I don't think it is. But it talks about the expansion of coyotes basically all across North America.
They're like in New York City now, or
all
something.
over. Yeah. It's pretty amazing.
Dude, Chicago.
Everywhere.
They're in
Yep.
like the city in Chicago.
Right.
Yeah,
Wow.
I've seen them downtown on 16th Street Mall before.
Yeah.
But yeah, coyotes, I mean, they're literally everywhere. And historically, that's, based on, accounts and different things that I've read, that's not the case. So, that's a potential change. Who knows? But they're another super adaptable species. They use kind of that edge habitat that humans have created. Really any of those canine species are going to be adaptable like that. So there certainly is going to be conflicts with humans and wolves and livestock and wolves. How much, I guess it's remained to be seen at this point. So
Right. Time will tell, huh?
Yeah, we're going to have some interesting years for sure.
Yeah.
So, and we're going to learn a lot too. I mean, we're going to really see how the populations change, how animals react, all kinds of interesting things. So there's certainly an opportunity to learn some stuff.
And just because I need to get caught up on speed on it, but just a question, if you don't know the answer, that's fine. But are wolves in the state of Colorado still on the endangered species list? So anything that's on the endangered species list, you can't manage, or the state cannot manage the population, right? Or
So
I'm not sure how that works.
It depends on if they're federally listed or state listed.
Gotcha.
So state listings don't necessarily have the same weight with the Endangered Species Act, so that's kind of a separate thing. But so the Federal Endangered Species Act lists species that are of greatest concern or is endangered. So you think of things like bald eagles. Those at one point were endangered. They've since been removed from endangered species list.
Which is great, because we see them in
Yep.
Colorado now. It's
All the
awesome. There's one right here at the lake,
Yep.
on a regular basis.
With the wolf, that's kind of gone back and forth, right? And you'll catch me off guard here, but last I knew is they were listed, and then I believe they were something was adjusted so that we can still maintain control and management. But I'd have to do a little bit more digging on that exactly.
Sure.
I don't deal with the wolves often, hardly ever. I'll get sightings that will go out and investigate. But when it comes to wolves, I'm not involved in any of the planning process for the wolf plan,
Sure. Yeah.
that type of thing.
I'm asking you like
sure.
you got all the answers for everything.
I mean, I
No,
can
you're super knowledgeable,
certainly
though,
look
so,
that
like,
up.
yeah.
But last I looked last I recall was that, essentially that management has been given back to the states. So,
Oh, that's really good news. Yeah.
that gives us a little bit more
I think that was the
flexibility.
biggest thing that worried me about it, was not being able to basically, predators need to be managed, in
Sure.
my opinion. Whether it's, a badger or all the way up to a grizzly bear, right? Like
Sure.
we're seeing that in Montana right now, where grizzlies were put on the endangered species list, and now X amount of people are dying a year. And now they're like, wait a minute, maybe we should rethink this a little bit, right? So
Sure.
so now that's at the ballot box, I believe, or is a ballot initiative. So yeah, it concerns me. Like, I'm okay with having wolves here in a sense, not 100% comfortable with it, but it makes me feel more comfortable if they were able to be managed at least by Parks and Wildlife.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in that draft plan, there's several different phases. There's going to be 4 phases. And don't quote me exactly, but I think the first phase is a reintroduction phase. Phase 2 is maybe a monitoring phase. Phase 3 is kind of where our populations are stable once they reach a certain point. And then phase 4 is ultimately they would be, they'd go back to the commission and say, hey, this is how we're going to manage those. And the potential for hunting would occur in that 4th phase. There's a lot of debate on what that population should be, at what level that population should be. And ultimately that's, the commission's decision on what numbers those would be. But that's been written into the plan to at least utilize hunting as a management tool, which is consistent with what we do with everything else.
With every other species,
So,
yeah.
The challenge with the whole endangered species stuff is that, if they are listed federally, that restricts the state's ability to manage them in that way. And we've seen that, where you have, lawsuits that are just constant, lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit with these different endangered species. And then you end up with a tremendous population of wolves, and like up in Minnesota, that's
Yeah,
what
it's a
happened.
real problem
And
up
they
there.
had literally thousands of wolves, and then they were able to hunt, and they killed over 1,000 wolves.
And I think that the
Super quick.
Idaho too was
So-
kind of a similar situation where
Yep.
they were actually, I don't know who it was, if it was like a third party organization, but you could actually go up there and make money for hunting wolves, I think, which I don't know how that works, or
Sure.
to me, it's crazy. One of my biggest concerns, I think too, with the whole thing is, growing up as a kid, we never had bald eagles here. I think the lynx was just getting repopulated when I
Yep.
was a kid, and I've seen several lynx now, which is super cool. Moose were never around. Now they scare the shit out of me half the time when I'm in.
Right.
I did it twice. All right, I'm gonna bleep those out, man. I've tried so hard. I've done so good up until now, but, anyways, the moose population here is amazing now.
Yep.
Right, to the point where guys are going out able to harvest moose. I see more moose sometimes than I see elk in certain game units.
Sure.
And I'm sure that the wolves are going to have a pretty big impact on that population too, right? Because that's probably the first.
Yeah, they're going to be, I think, pretty vulnerable. And we're in kind of the heyday of moose here in Colorado. We've got lots and lots of moose. They're doing quite well. Undoubtedly, we're going to have predation by wolves on moose, as well as predation on elk. It's those moose like to kind of stay in those same areas, and we'll see how they do. But I think there's going to be some changes in habitat types that, things like elk will use just because, they're more vulnerable in certain habitats and stuff like that. And so, I've seen what it's done in Yellowstone. Obviously, you can't hunt in Yellowstone, Sure.
but I know that the moose population has dropped tremendously there since the reintroduction of wolves.
They definitely. I mean, that's in most like Minnesota and in Michigan, some of those areas where they have a lot of wolves and a lot of moose. I mean, those moose are a significant source of their diet.
Right.
And actually, you can. I mean, like Isle Royale. They do a lot of predator prey studies on those islands, and there'll be tons of moose. The wolves will increase and eat the moose out of house and home. Then the population of wolves will crash, and you can find all kinds of really cool data. They've had a lot of neat data on wolves and moose.
What island is
up
that?
There? Isle Royale up in northern Michigan.
Not familiar with it. Okay.
But yeah, there's a lot of science when it comes to the wolves and moose out there. So, yep.
All right. So, do you anticipate? I'm just going to say it blatantly: wolves being in Evergreen at some point.
I'm sure we'll get sightings. Whether they decide to camp here, stay here.
Yeah.
Time will tell. I mean, I'd like to think that these animals are going to want to find more remote areas and areas where they have.
They're pretty elusive, man. Like
They
lot
are.
like a lion.
Yep.
I've gone to Yellowstone to go photograph them and have not seen a wolf. And the time I did, it was thousands of yards away from a spotting scope, So
I think they're like most predators, that they're going to want to be in areas that are free of people at all possible, wherever they can find good food and resources away from people. That's going to be probably their first pick. But as habitats fill up, and resources become more scarce, they're going to start exploring other spots. And, just like we have kind of rogue bears and rogue lions that key in on certain things, whether it be livestock or pets, stuff like that, it's inevitable that we're going to have wolves that are gonna behave the same way.
Yeah.
So you've got wolves and moose on that island right there?
Yep.
Wow.
That is unbelievable to me.
Thunder
It's in the
Bay.
middle of Lake Superior. Not in the middle, but
Yeah, if you type like Isle Royale moose,
that's pretty far in there.
yeah, moose study or something in there. So
I know. I've been trying not to curse on these, and I've was gonna nail it today,
I feel like I'm talking to
but
you.
I got scared.
I got scared.
Every time I think I've seen a Yeti, it's been a moose. Like, 'cause they're just tall, black,
yeah, there's
normally in a dark spot.
moose and wolf. Yep. Annual. So, yeah, there's one that says on that people also ask. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so there's that dip that
So
you were
what are
talking
So that's
about.
the first 5 years. So just keep hitting that next button down there on the bottom, and you'll see
Oh
what
wow, it's like a roller
how that-
coaster ride.
how that population fluctuates there.
No way. Look at
So
that.
you can
So
see,
it just keeps going. It keeps getting more drastic
to
too.
see how much those moose, and then the moose
Yeah.
just crash.
Which then in turn,
And then it kind of balances out, and then
so we're gonna go through some major fluctuation like this. How many years? 53 years they've been doing this study.
that's the 2000.
That's a long road.
Yep.
Wow,
That is a
that's
long
wild.
time. So at what point was that major crash, Jeremy? If you click back
So, I
to
mean, that went
previous-
from-
Of moose
yeah.
was that looked like 99.
So people that are just listening to this, we are looking at a graph right now of wolf population and moose population on
it's probably like 97.
this island. So that would have been at 40 years, right?
Yep. Looks like, I mean, they dropped from 2,500 to a little under 1,000 in just a year or two.
Wow.
basically as the wolf population.
At least we
doubled.
have some data from like Yellowstone and some of these places. Like, where's this? What's this island again?
Isle
El
Royale.
Royale.
Yep. So it's one of the longest continuous studies of predators and prey in the
That
world.
is so wild. So but thinking about that island, 2,500 moose and
Yeah, that's not that big.
that many predators and sharing the same space.
You know,
What is the moose population in Colorado right now? Do you happen to know that, or is that something you can look up, Jeremy? Maybe
it's probably in that 2,500 range.
is it?
Yep.
Okay.
But steadily increasing. I mean, we're doing quite well.
Yeah.
So
So
That's
it issued 500 to 600 tags per year.
2,500 to 3,500. So
Yeah, I've seen a lot of them, and I mean that was something that you never. I never saw it. 30 years ago as a kid.
yeah, yep. But can
Is
you
that
imagine
running
that
around?
many moose on that little island? I mean, that's how many we
That's
have
insane.
just in Colorado.
And what else is on that island? Is it just wolves?
Just
and
wolves
moose?
and moose.
That's it.
basically.
It's insane.
Wow.
So
So it's like a tennis match between the two of
And
them.
they don't allow hunting or anything on it? Is it kind of
no,
like
it's part of the national park.
Okay.
So, yep.
Wow, that's pretty incredible.
Yep.
What's that island off of the coast of Santa Barbara, I think, in California? There's an island out there where they had Roosevelt elk and they had all kinds of stuff.
Catalina, and there was a few other.
Well, Catalina's got bison because I've
Buffalo,
been out
yeah.
there before.
No
and
way.
It's
Yep.
wild, man. Yeah.
I've seen it from the coast, but I've never
They
been
had
out
great
there.
whites and bison, pretty wild. But yeah, there was another island there, and I think at one point it just became such a crazy environment for those species. They allowed hunting on it for a long time, and the populations were managed. But as
Yep.
soon as they took it off, then basically California Game and Fish had to go in and just basically decimate
Yep.
the population of everything on there. Is pretty heartbreaking, honestly. I think there's a documentary on it or something that I saw.
Well, that's
pretty
some,
wild.
some
But
of the
yeah,
things in areas that don't have predators. I mean, kind of
Right.
like New Zealand. I mean, there's no real predators on there, and
The stags.
all
and-
those animals have been introduced there. It's kind of an interesting environment for them.
It is. Same with Hawaii, the access deer.
Sure.
Same thing. I mean, you can go over and hunt access deer, I think, anytime that you want.
Yep.
And I think that I don't even know if there's a limit on
Yeah. I don't
what
know.
you can take, because I think they're an Indian, from India, right?
I think
so,
so.
like,
somewhere in that.
There's no tigers in Hawaii.
Right.
So there's nothing to prey on them other than hunters, but
Sure.
that's some incredible meat. That's like a bucket list for me, is to
Really?
get over there and try to get over and do an access deer.
Sure.
The bow would be awesome. It'd be incredible. Yeah, if you've never been to Catalina, it is a wild place, man, to see. You be on the beach and there's bison.
Wow.
If you're going to be a bison, is there a better place to be stuck than the
you
Catalina?
kidding me? The only thing you got to worry about is sharks when you swim.
No doubt.
I'm sure that has happened.
Sailing.
It's had to have. I think that there was. I was listening to Rogan, and I can't remember who was on there, but there was somebody off. It was either off of San Diego or Catalina. It was a diver that just got eaten by a great white like this week or something.
There was a dude in Mexico.
Was it? Maybe it was in Mexico. Was
it
it
in
the
Mexico.
diver that got
Yeah, it was a diver.
decapitated?
Yeah, he took him from the shoulders in his head.
Oh
Right off.
man, that is
He
my
was diving-
biggest
He was
fear.
diving
Like,
for like scallops or something.
I don't really feel out of my element being in the forest, but in the ocean, it's
Oh yeah.
it's totally different. I lived at the beach for a long time, and I used to go out and do stand-up paddle and get like past the breaks, and we would go out when the gray whales were migrating,
Sure.
and it was super cool. But these gray whales would swim underneath your paddleboard,
Wow.
and they're as big as a school bus sometimes or bigger.
Sure.
And it's just an impressive thing to have happen. Like, you're just totally out of your element at that
Right.
point. Like, but so I couldn't imagine
Well,
You've been
having to
diving,
deal with a
right?
shark. But
Yeah.
I don't know what's worse. We've talked about shark or grizzly on this
Right.
many a times before, but yeah, they're both bad in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about the water is that you're just so, like, even as fast as you can swim, you're still slower
You're
than
helpless.
everything.
Yeah.
Everything.
Humans are not meant to be in the water, really, I don't think.
No.
We weren't designed for that. And I think the scaredest I've ever been in the ocean was from a sea lion.
Really?
Yeah, I was surfing, and didn't know what the hell I was doing, and I was out on a wave, and this sea lion would not let me come into shore. And we're talking about a 400-pound pit bull, basically. Wow. I mean, with canines and everything. And he was showing his teeth at me and like snorting, and he never got more than, I don't know, maybe 30 yards from me.
Sure.
But still, that was scary enough. Like just swimming circles around me, and then I'd try to get on the wave, and he'd get in front of me, and
wow,
it was not cool. I was out there for like an hour, just like, and you're laying on a surfboard. I don't know if you've ever seen guys fist fight on surfboards, because that happens occasionally. Okay. You might be in somebody's territory or something like that. Point Break. But it's hilarious because there's no moment, like you're in the water. So like to have any force or like to get something like that off of you, good luck, man.
Right.
I mean, you might as well be fighting in zero gravity situation,
Right.
It's slim to none there. I think that's why they train those moonwalkers underwater, right? Or something like that. Yeah. It's just you don't have any ground to the earth to have any sort of momentum. Like I've seen guys full on just clobbering each other out there, and you literally have to hold on to one of their arms so you can punch with the other one. And
right.
then they're not even bleeding, it's like you're watching a UFC fight that, these monster blows and nothing's happening. Like no blood, no nothing, not even a shiner. I'm sure that there's some Samoan dudes out there that could hold you down, but yeah. So, grizzly bears. Some people say they're in Colorado. Some people say that they're not. Some people say that they have sightings. Somebody has some footage. Do we have anything recorded that you know of?
I've never even received a remotely credible sighting in my career.
But you've gotten a call occasionally?
I mean, we've gotten calls about Sasquatch too. So
we have talked about that. What's some of the wildest calls that you've gotten? I mean, Sasquatch is pretty wild, but
yeah, we've had like somebody's. There's a breeding call of Sasquatch. I don't know how they know it's a breeding call, but that was kind of interesting. Yeah, we've had that where somebody's poaching back here, and we go out on a call, and it's these Sasquatch hunters out four-wheeling where they're not supposed to be, or this or that, or
really?
Yeah. I mean, with Bailey being right here,
right. Not to knock any of you people that live over there,
but they do like their Sasquatch, that's
right?
for sure.
Yeah, there's a whole museum down there or something, isn't there? Yeah. Okay.
They do some Sasquatch tours out in the woods. So
really?
That's a bit interesting, but I had one, the guy, I mean, he was convinced, it was a herd of 100 moose, and I'm like, it's probably not moose. It's probably elk, but he was convinced they were definitely moose. So sometimes you just don't argue.
Right.
But yep. A lot of people just see things that they don't, aren't probably the case,
Right.
And it can be all big or little types of animals, but
yeah, I've had times where I've scared myself.
Sure.
I mean, it happened to me this hunting season because I was talking to a bow hunter that was camped next to me, and I was solo hunting, and we were talking about cats, and I had just seen that cat.
Mm-hmm.
And he was telling me one time that he had turned around. He's got this kind of like sixth sense. And he said all he saw was just this basketball head. And it was sticking out of like, there's a lot of oak brush up there.
Okay.
He said all I could see was a perfect head of a mountain lion.
Sure.
And he was 20 yards from him or whatever. Right?
Sure.
And so after that story, I'm walking out in the dark, of course. And I swear to God, I had something grab my pant leg.
Right.
There was nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think a lion would have teased with the pant leg.
No, he would have gotten
He would have been on my shoulders at that point. But yeah, no, I did a quick turnaround. And then I had to laugh at myself. It was one of those good ones.
Sure.
But yeah, how often are you in close proximity with wildlife? I mean, I know of one instance where I was just going to breakfast to meet a family member, and I stopped by and there was a deer, basically in your truck, and then tried to get into my truck in the middle of the road. How often do those sort of calls kind of happen? And
yeah, I mean, that was pretty rare. That was not a real common situation. More often what we're dealing with is things that are injured, a lot of road kills, lots of road kills. And so we'll get those calls all the time where somebody hit something, animal's still alive, they don't know what to do. Ultimately, I can't tell them to put it down, right? They don't have any legal or lawful authority to do that. As much as it sucks for them to have to sit there and wait for, a deputy or a wildlife officer or whoever to show up, it's probably the better situation to just have to wait, and then we end up.
So is it
making that
illegal to
assessment.
put an animal down if
It is.
if I were to hit an elk
Yep.
or something?
It
and
is.
It's okay.
Yep. One, you don't have a license to do so.
Sure.
Possession of any wildlife, you've got to have some sort of license.
Not to mention you got a firearm out on the highway or whatever.
I had a situation where a guy did do that and ended up putting 6 rounds through a moose's head, but he's shooting it through the nose, right? He's thinking it's between the eyes, which is more in the sinus cavity than the head. And that's a perfect example why we don't allow the public to do that. Plus, it was right on the highway, and so there was a number of issues, safety concerns, as well as, the poor moose having to deal with that type of thing. So, we tell folks, deputies are trained to put stuff down. We put down things all the time. As much as we don't want an animal sitting there and suffering, the safety of the public is utmost, and we can't have people skipping rounds off the highway or shooting down. I had a deer the other day that was right off of 470, and so I had to get a trooper to stop the highway because there was no safe shooting lanes, and so we had to do that. But so that's, it's an unfortunate part of our job, but the alternative is that animal sits there and suffers. So I just as soon put those animals down. In most cases, if I've got time, I can donate those animals out. I've got a long list of people that'll take wildlife, especially if it's in good shape. I can get those animals donated out pretty quickly.
That's awesome. So it's not going to waste at that point, right?
Yep.
That's great.
Obviously it doesn't all, because you see plenty of roadkills on the side. A lot of times we don't get the call. They get hit and they get just hammered by whatever, or it's dead there. So we don't, obviously can only just touch a small fraction of them, but we try to salvage as much as we can. So that's probably the most of when we're like direct interaction with wildlife. Things caught in fences, animals.
Is that very common?
In conifer and evergreen is very common.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially like the hog wire fence, with like the 4-inch square mesh. Or chain link or something. They'll jump and they'll get their foot tangled in there, or just poorly maintained barbed wire fences. They'll get their feet tangled in that. The other real nasty one is when you have the spikes on the tops of the fences. Actually, just west of here. I'll have to show you a picture sometime. We had an elk that got caught on one of those. We ended up having to put it down, but man, the poor thing, it just sat there on those spikes on the tops of a big old nasty gate. And they're just brutal on these critters.
I saw horrific things. I have some horrible friends that send me these stuff, but it was a guy that was in a BMX park, and he was trying to jump one of those things on his bicycle, and not good.
Yeah.
I doubt the guy lived.
Sure.
It's kind of crazy, but
yeah,
is that, I know that we've talked about it before, but I just want to touch on it real quick. I think that's somebody's responsibility, whether they're a hunter or not, or they respect wildlife or not. If you move into a mountain community or you're living around wildlife, maintaining some of those things like fences and
sure,
maybe not putting up a a 10-foot tall privacy fence around your entire property for migration purposes.
Sure.
And I know we've talked about that before, but that's some of the stuff that you deal with between realtors, right? And
Yep.
kind of educating the general public on that. Because I think a lot of the people and the influx that we're seeing, and the reason why I have the hunting knowledge that I do and the knowledge of wildlife is I grew up here and I have family members that grew up here. And if they didn't teach me, or if Colorado Parks and Wildlife didn't come to my school and teach me some stuff,
Sure.
I wouldn't have known.
Yeah, so I think, when I go and talk to different groups or people, I'll ask them, what's the biggest threat to the wildlife? And half of them will say, well, poaching. Poaching's the biggest threat. It's not the biggest threat. The other half will be climate change. Climate change is not the biggest threat. What about vehicle strikes? Vehicle strikes aren't the biggest thing. The biggest thing that affects wildlife is habitat. Habitat loss is the number one contributor, both here in North America as well as all over the world, in the reduction of wildlife. And so if you want more wildlife, you got to improve the habitat. It's just as simple as that. And when you put your house in a given area, or you build a new highway, or you build a new hiking trail, or a mountain bike trail, or whatever it may be, that is a direct loss of habitat for whatever that species. So, you can't have wildlife without that. And so when you're building fences or in your property, right, that may have migration impacts to your property. It may just be that much more difficult for that animal to get into your property to feed. There's all kinds of things, but there's both direct habitat loss and then there's indirect habitat loss. So, by you hiking or like Maxwell Falls, for instance, right? There's some good national forest right up there. But have you ever been up there a day? There's not like 100 cars up along the parking road.
I don't even go anymore.
How many wildlife do you think are utilizing that spot?
Zero.
Exactly, right? So those animals, it's great habitat. Like if there were no people there, it'd be great habitat. Same thing with things like, even elk meadows, right? There's probably fewer animals that used to use that or that use that now than historically did, just because the amount of people are there. That's indirect habitat loss, right? The habitat's still there, but it's not functioning at the same level as it used to.
And that's just the human to wildlife interaction, right?
That's and it could be pets, it could be livestock, it could be
noise.
It could be noise. I mean, it could be all kinds of different things, right? We know, if you run an ATV down a trail, it's going to have that noise impact for some sort of buffer around all these types of areas. So all of these impacts that we have as humans, are going to kind of carry over into the ultimate, the population, whether it be the size or the productivity or their survival. It's going to have some sort of effect on there. And, knowing that, knowing how valued or how valuable wildlife is to me, if I move into a specific area, I'm going to try and kind of reduce some of my impacts. Maybe I can plant some trees that are more favorable to certain species. All kinds of different things. It doesn't have to be big animals. It could be, putting birdhouses up. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do to help improve the wildlife habitat for things that are around you. Invasive species, planting more appropriate grasses and shrubs or flowers. And I mean, there's a lot of things you can do. But ultimately, you got to look at that habitat component, and where there's a good habitat for whatever target species, you're going to have a good population.
Okay. So it's good to know. That's something that I don't think we've talked about. And I know that you work on a lot of habitat with it. I forget what you guys call them. I'm drawing a blank right now.
We just
restructured habitat or something.
Yeah, rehabilitated habitat, or
there you go. You guys just did a sheep one, right?
I just finished. It was a 73-acre project for bighorn sheep, so wintering bighorns, which is pretty neat. We ended up doing a lot of thinning. Historically, fire would come in there and burn these hillsides and really open up the hillsides, and the sheep do much better on open hillsides. There's more grass, they can see further, so they can avoid predators, things like that. And in any case, these hillsides have over the years have become overly dense, and so we go in there, thin things out, and it really makes a big difference for those animals. The grass is really coming in. We've actually done some controlled burns in certain areas to help kind of thin out some of that, just kind of that understory, down logs, small trees, stuff like that. And that can really play a positive role too. And same thing we do with fish habitat. I mean, we do up on, like the Dream Stream or, above Spinney Mountain Reservoir. They've done a lot of habitat work, and you've seen these a lot on private properties too. That's exactly what they're doing. So they're doing habitat work so they can support more fish, higher populations of fish, both big and small. They obviously need prey and the bugs and stuff in order to grow big trout. So there's a lot to it, but it starts at the bottom. You can't just have, big mature animals without having that foundation below you. And so, you got to have everything.
Perfect. Well, we're coming up on time, Scott.
Sure.
I'd love to have you back in the spring.
Absolutely.
Which is just around the corner.
Sure.
And I'd love to talk about trout fishing and some of the impacts that anglers have on streams. And because I think, like the bow hunting community, and even much more, I've seen a ton of people mishandling fish, not fishing to reds, just all the general stuff. And normally I have like a guide come in or something like that, and we talk about that a lot. But I'd love to have you sit in on one of those if you're available. So we'll definitely do that.
Okay.
Real quick before we jump off though, or if you got a few more minutes, let's talk about what CPW's got coming up, or Colorado Parks and Wildlife. If there's anything that you know about, like, definitely I encourage you, if you're an angler or a hunter or just somebody that's interested in wildlife or appreciates them, go out to some of these commission meetings, right? Can you kind of drop some of those dates of that sort of stuff that's happening? Maybe if there's a hunter's ed class that you know about that's coming up.
Sure.
So like
the Northeast region's having their Sportsman's Caucus on February 15th. That's at 6060 Broadway.
Okay.
So at our Denver office. And I think that's either 6 to 8 or 6:30 to 8:30, something like that. But you should be able to find that.
Is there a schedule or something on that?
I'm trying to think where I found that.
So once again, we're at cpw.state.co is the website.
We're also kind of in the final push for hunter ed classes, right? Everybody wants to get their hunter ed done before application series or application season in April. Yeah. So we've got a lot of hunter education classes going on. We've also got a lot of demand, so a lot of the classes are full. So check back to our website if you're not seeing one. Keep checking back because we're putting them on fairly frequently.
And that's something where you would have to reserve a spot?
Yeah, so I don't know why it keeps sending you to this website, but
super weird. I just tried doing the Earl that Bobby just said.
Yep.
And it screwed me up.
Just Google Colorado Parks and Wildlife. It
there
should get you. Yeah.
There you go.
Okay.
All right. So up in that top, hit calendar on the very, very top.
Yeah.
Right there. That'll give you kind of some of our up-to-date things.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So scroll down just a little bit.
Oh, there you go. That's your entire calendar right there.
Yeah. So we've got a lot of ice fishing clinics. This spring we'll have more kind of regular fishing, fly fishing clinics, that type of thing. If you
do some recreational stuff too. It's not all just dealing with wildlife, right? Like I see an Elk Meadow hike here, so that's.
Yep. Yeah. So these are we've got obviously the parks have a lot of different activities. Here's one: learn to ice fish at Staunton State Park. So there's a bunch of different types of things. But this is the web page that you can get to fishing clinics, hunter education, and then other types of classes, clinics, seminars, stuff like that.
Perfect. All right. So that is cpw.state.co.us.
That's
if you
a
want
stacked
any
calendar, too.
information.
There's always something going on. It's
Yeah,
crazy.
right?
Yeah, that's cool.
All right, last question. And I always like asking you this. What are some things that the general public could do to make your job easier? Because I know you as a personal friend now and how much you deal with. And I only know a little bit, but I just know these wildlife officers deal with a lot on a daily basis. Colorado Parks and Wildlife does. The park rangers that I know, even just, Jefferson County open space park rangers.
Mm-hmm.
What are some things that could help you out in your day-to-day job from the general public?
I guess maybe I think in the past we've talked about feeding wildlife and some other things, but maybe we'll talk maybe more about poaching. Being a good witness. Ultimately, wildlife is all of ours, right? And so we all have a vested interest in making sure that wildlife is protected. And unfortunately, I'm just one person, so I can't be everywhere. Some of our best cases have come from people that have called things in. I had some guy last year hunting before archery season, and ultimately it was a Operation Game Thief report. And we were able to make a very good case on that because the guy was such a good witness. So this by being a good witness doesn't mean confronting somebody, doesn't mean getting involved, but it often means making good notes of what you've actually seen. And also, recording a license plate, that's critical in a lot of cases. We had some folks that shot some elk off 285, and a license plate was one of the big keys in catching that. So that was a pretty big case this fall that we're kind of in process with. But a license plate, that's what sealed the deal. I've got another case that's going through, our court system right now that it was a tip from like 3 or 4 years before I actually even started this investigation that clued me on to this particular group of people. So, and it was a benign tip, like it didn't even lead to kind of anything more, but it gave me enough of like, maybe something's here. So even if you think that there's something not all that significant in your mind, a lot of times that might be the missing piece of information that we're looking for. And the public's eyes, this is not aimed to have everybody ratting out their neighbor. That's not the goal of it, but it also is like, this is your wildlife. Like, if you want to protect your wildlife and something is really egregious, there's an opportunity for you to call and report that. And,
especially if you're a law-abiding sportsman, I think.
Sure.
It makes me furious.
It's I always tell folks, it's one thing if somebody is ignorant to the law or makes a mistake, but there's something totally different when there's an intentionality behind it. And, these are in a lot of cases bona fide criminals that are engaged in significant poaching acts as well as other types of criminal acts. A lot of times these large criminal investigations involve poaching. They might involve drugs or guns or money. They may
human trafficking. I know
all kinds of things.
It's crazy.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so this is not, kind of a request for the mundane or the accidental, right? This is for somebody who's intentionally doing those types of things. Okay. But being a good witness is always helpful for us because I can't be everywhere.
And you have multiple ways, because we've talked about this before on the podcast, to report that. And I think it's operationgamethief.com. Jeremy, look this up. Just type in Operation Game Thief.
It's under our website.
Okay.
But if you just do Colorado Operation Game Thief, it'll pull up.
There's a 1-800 number as well. Before I spout it off, make sure it's right.
Yeah, there's...
Okay, so let's see here. Colorado Operation Game Thief. you can call 1-877-COL-OGT for Operation Game Thief. That's 1-877-265-6648. Or you can simply email @state.co.us. So the multiple ways that you can get a hold of somebody, and this passes you basically right through to the state agency, right?
Yep. So we've got Operation Game Thief dispatchers that will essentially take calls, and you can be anonymous, or you can list your personal information as well. And that's a great place that you can report whatever violation it is. And it's been pretty amazing the number of cases that we've been able to make by a pretty minor report, or appears to be kind of a minor situation, ends up ballooning into this much more massive poaching case. So there's a lot of it going on, unfortunately. And it's unfortunately, without the help of the public, we don't even catch a fraction of it.
Yeah, it's a great point that you brought up too. That it's all of our wildlife, it's all of our public land. I think a lot of people don't understand that our tax dollars are paying for all that and the management of it. So
yep,
you should view it as yours.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, if I saw your house being robbed, right, I wouldn't say, well, it's just his house being robbed. No, it's still unacceptable in my mind, even though it might be your house that's being robbed, right? If I witness that, I'm going to call. So, perfect. Yep.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. This has been great. We'll let you get back to the forest there and patrolling or whatever you got going on this afternoon. But I always appreciate your time. You're welcome back anytime if you guys ever want a spot in here. You have it. That. So,
thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Jeremy, take us away.
Awesome.
Thanks for listening to the Mountainside Podcast. If you haven't had a chance to do this already, please take a moment, follow, like, subscribe, or rate on whatever platform you catch the Mountainside Podcast at. Also, if you'd like some more information on upcoming episodes, safety tips, access to all of our affiliates, and all the badass discounts that we get here at the Mountainside Podcast, check out themountainsidepodcast.com.